Hello and welcome to this overview of the CWS Progressive Employment materials that are housed on the CWS website. My name is Hugh Bradshaw. I'm the Employment Services Manager at Voc Rehab, and I'm going to be your guide for today's journey through the Progressive Employment materials. Another webinar that's on the site shares a little more around Progressive Employment and gives a good overview, so I would encourage you to take a look at that webinar if you have a chance, if you haven't already. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move through this site, show you where to find materials, where to find the documents, and go from there. So with that, I'm on the main page right now for CWS. It's at cwsvt.com. You can put a www before that if you like. You'll come to the home page here, which is has the overview of the work that we do. And then at the top, we have a link that says Progressive Employment, or a tab rather. So this is the Progressive Employment page for all the Progressive Employment materials. So I'm going to give you a quick look at it. So in the first section, we have an overview and a checklist. We have some guides and desk references. And then right after that, we have several videos, and I would encourage you when you get a chance to take a look at these videos. These are some success stories from working with businesses and using Progressive Employment. There's a video overview that I gave for some other states that are studying this, and then some individual stories of our customers around the state who have benefited from these kinds of experiences. Then we have a section for the employer forms and information. We have a letter, the information sheet for businesses. We have the Progressive Employment Desk reference that walks through some of the elements of Progressive Employment. A vendor request form, I'll show you more about that. A letter from James Smith that confirms insurance coverage. We have an insurance desk reference. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about this later on around insurance, but all of our trainees through CWS are covered by default through the risk management policy for both workers' comp and general liability. The note usually suffices. I'll show you that note in a minute, but if a business is requesting a copy of an insurance certificate, we can certainly get that for them, and I'll show you how to do that. We have an on-the-job training agreement. That's a form that we fill out that identifies where the skill development needs to be. We have a marketing piece, creative hiring opportunities. We'll show you that as well. And then the next section is consumer forms and information. There's a brochure. There's a Progressive Employment agreement that's signed off on. There's a progress report that's captured from the business. An individual grant request, this is to generate the payments to individuals, the training offsets. We have the attendance report that's required to be able to verify the hours so that we can make that payment. And then we have a self-eval for individuals who have participated in Progressive Employment. We also have a quick section here on reporting injuries and a link to my email address. And then at the very bottom, we've basically consolidated all of these forms into one section. So this is the forms at a glance. There's the employer documents. We have job seeker documents, the insurance documents. Here's the various desk references. And then we do have a section on the work opportunity tax credit. This is a tax credit available to employers who hire from target populations such as individuals with disabilities, veterans, long-term TANF participants, and some other eligible populations. So with that, I'm going to return to the top of the page. Here we have the Progressive Employment overview. I'm going to go ahead and open that for you. Some of these documents may ask you to accept them. It may say that some files may harm your computer. It's okay to go ahead and say yes to any of those kinds of prompts that come up. Here's the Progressive Employment overview, and this basically mirrors the PowerPoint that I mentioned earlier that is on this same page of the CWS website. So it'd be good to watch that video, but here's just basically some written information similar to what's on that webinar. Then we go into the Progressive Employment checklist. So here's where we get a prompt, and I'm going to go ahead and say open. And it's going to download that file. It takes a second for some of these to load. And this one is taking particularly long. There we go. And so this is the checklist. And essentially, this checklist walks you through the Progressive Employment process, the things that you need to be doing, the things that you should be considering. And in this document are actually hot links to all of the information that is on the main page. So you'll see all the way through here, we have similar to what you see on the main page, all of the various elements. and again, a link to the website where you can find all of them. So this is a great checklist. You can print this, you can keep it electronically, and then check off the boxes as you go. It's really up to you. Please note that when you have this open, if you begin to fill this out and you don't save it and say, okay, I've done that, and then rather than say File, Save As, and put it somewhere on my computer to save it, and you could give it the individual's name or initials here. If I don't do that and I simply close the document, so here's my document, I check off these boxes, I'm doing a great job, and then I close it, it's going to prompt me, do I want to save changes? If I say yes, it's going to again put me into the screen where to save it on my computer. And here's why. When I go to close that, and this time I'm going to say don't save, it's going to close the document. What happens is, close that out. So if I go back into that checklist again, you're going to see when I open that file, it's going to open back up to the default document. So this is a read-only document. So if you're going to be using this to track progress, you're going to want to save that on your own computer because it's not going to save changes that you make to it here online. Next, we have the guides and desk references. This is the Progressive Employment Desk reference. This talks about what it is that we're doing and speaks specifically to the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is important that we're aligned with the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so this has the 6-point test, talks about the determination of what is training and what is not. And if we go a little bit further down, what we've done is we've taken each of those 6 elements and we've essentially explained where CWS progressive employment fits in that and what we're doing that essentially aligns with the FLSA requirements. So I'm going to walk through real quickly, but the individual needs to be supervised, so they're not put just on a training site and left alone. They need to have supervision directly from somebody at the business. We do not place trainees in workplaces where workers have been recently laid off or having hours reduced. We do not want to supplant existing workers, so it's important if we know a company has had a layoff or a downsizing, we may not want to approach them around progressive employment activities, particularly if they're using those progressive employment activities to identify new candidates. That's something we want to make sure that we're avoiding. Also, progressive employment placement should not be exceeding 25 hours per week unless there is some kind of an exception. In that case, you're going to want to go to your regional manager or come to the employment services manager, which is me right now. You want to make sure that you get approval to go over that 25 hours per week. The reason being, the closer you get to 40 hours, the more it looks like employment and the more this may trigger some exceptions. So we want to make sure we're staying under that 25 hours per week. Also, we want to make sure that these are not going on long term. So the max is really 8 weeks in duration. If it needs to go longer, again, you're going to ask for approval from the regional manager or myself. And again, we want to make sure that we're using these with the intent, which is to leverage employment, get people plugged into employment or build skills, but it's on short-term placements, not 6-month or 12-month placements. I've highlighted this next one because it's come up several times, but we're paying these trainees training offsets. We are not calling them stipends. We are not calling them payment. We are not calculating them on an hourly basis. This is very, very important. These individuals are getting paid a training offset to offset their cost of getting to and from that training site. And we have a guideline of $10 for a half day or $20 for a full day. Again, exceptions can be made, but you need to bring those exceptions to your regional manager. And so we want to make sure that we're staying within that stipend, not using the word stipend and using the term training offset. The reason we changed that terminology is because there are some individuals and organizations who consider stipends income, and that therefore impacts earnings for folks and potentially benefits. So training offsets are not considered income for the majority of programs, the exception being food stamps. But we want to make sure that we're using that terminology, training offset. We also want to make sure, number 6, we want to make sure that we're very clear that these training offsets are not a wage. They're not calculated on an hourly basis or any other basis. They are specifically a half-day or daily amount to offset the cost of getting to the training. Number 7, we make it clear that the employer is not obligated to hire the individual at the completion of the training. We certainly love it when they do, but it is not a requirement of participating in progressive employment. And in fact, any work experience does not have a requirement that the employer hire the individual at the end of the training. Next, we have an insurance desk reference. Again, this is an overview of the insurance coverage. We have general liability and workers' compensation for all of our trainees. The insurance is only for those cases that are directly arranged by DVR or our contractors and our partners, CWS partners included. We want to make sure that that's who's sponsoring the training, so to speak, and also, more importantly, who's supporting it with the business. On-the-job training agreements do not fall. The coverage does not apply to those individuals because, in fact, on-the-job training is when the individual is hired and on payroll. So the employer's insurances are in place in that case. They are not considered a trainee. They're actually considered an employee, and we're just reimbursing that employer for a portion of the additional training costs. Temp to hire, which is much more rarely used, but this is where we may partner with a staffing agency and pay some administrative fees. Again, the insurance coverages do not apply because the staffing agency is actually the employer of record, and so they're providing the insurance coverage for those individuals. In the rare case when an employer does request a certificate of insurance, it can be generated from the insurance company. There's a contact here, Carol Poulin, who's at Noel W. Johnson Insurance. She can, needs some basic information. She needs the email, the address of the employer, the name of the contact person at the employer, the name of the business, and she will generate a certificate of insurance and send it directly to the employer. Again, and I've highlighted this in yellow, it is not required every time we make a placement. The coverage is already in effect. These candidates are covered by default. Usually, as I mentioned, the letter from James Smith, which I'll show you in a second, suffices. But if, in fact, they're asking for an insurance certificate, we can get a hold of Carol and she can generate it. But if they're not asking for it, there's no need to generate it because, again, the coverage is in place. There are certainly some activities that are not covered by the liability or the workers' comp insurance, particularly dangerous industries, roofing, logging, some farming activities. They're not covered. It's best to check with myself if you have questions around that. It does not cover driving or operating any vehicle such as backhoes, heavy equipment, tractor trailers, things like that. If the consumer is injured or has some damages or injuries, you want to report those immediately. We want to make sure that the individual gets to a medical assistance if they need that. There is instructions in the insurance section that walk you through how to do that, and I'll show you that as well. So next is the OJT desk reference. Again, there's two different kinds of OJTs. One is what we see through WIOA or through our Department of Labor partners. This is where they're actually reimbursing a portion of the wage, up to 50%. And the durations can vary. I think most often they run about 6 months, but that's actually a wage subsidy. So they're subsidizing 50% of the wage during their OJTs. In the VR program, it's a little bit different. What we're doing is literally reimbursing the employer for any additional training costs they may incur when they're supporting our candidates. The guideline maximum is $3,000. We should never really be that high unless it's a highly technical, very difficult to train position. More often than not, these reimbursements are more in the range of hundreds of dollars, and in many cases, the employers aren't even asking for that reimbursement piece. But we're certainly making sure that in any of the cases that we're setting up an OJT, we're clear on the skills that we want developed. We want to get that feedback from the employer, and we want to make sure that the employer is indeed providing the training that we've outlined in the OJT agreement, which again, we'll show you that. So for every OJT, there has to be a clear description of the training. There has to be a clear description of the skills that we're looking to have developed. And then we do a calculation of the actual cost of reimbursement. So if it's taking a supervisor off the line for 2 hours to support the individual and that supervisor makes $20 an hour, then we're talking $40 reimbursement. Obviously, the calculation will be a greater amount if it's larger numbers of hours over a longer period of time. But essentially, we're doing a very real, actual calculation of that additional cost. Again, this is important. It's the cost above and beyond what they would normally provide for training to an individual. So the good example here is we have a candidate with a learning disability. We place them into an OJT. They're an employee of the company, but we're going to reimburse because we know that individual takes a little bit longer and needs a little more support with any kind of print materials or written materials, including manuals, employee manuals, instructional manuals, things like that. So we realize this is an issue. We talk to the employer about it. We identify how much additional time it will take for the employer to set someone aside to support the person, and then we make that calculation. So again, just to reiterate, unlike the other progressive employment options, anybody participating in OJT must be on the regular payroll of the employer, and they must be paid the same pay and benefits as other workers in the same position. And again, they're covered under the insurances that are available through that employer, not through our risk management policy. So that's workers' compensation, liability, any other insurances that are in place for the workers, the other workers in that employer, is what we would be expecting for our candidate to have in place once they're in an OJT, because again, an OJT, they are actually an employee at that point. So next we have the videos, and again, I would urge you to take a look at these videos. They're really nice stories about progressive employment and how we've used it and some nice successes. The employer forms and information. So the first piece right here is the information for businesses. This is essentially a document that lays out what it is, thanking them for participating in progressive employment, talks about some of the parameters, the not exceeding 25 hours in a week, the fact that they're covered under the state risk management policy. We do have a line in here that talks about OSHA and VOSHA. Because these are trainees and not employees, any major injuries, and VOSHA defines major injuries as amputation, loss of one or both eyes, hospitalization due to injury, or fatality. Those would be reportable by us as the training provider or the entity supporting the candidate. It does not fall to the employer, and this is important for a lot of employers who are very cognizant of their VOSHA and OSHA ratings because it impacts them financially as well. So again, if somebody has a major injury, we get them to immediately to any kind of medical attention they may need, and then we report that and report it to myself as well, and then we'll in turn report it to VOSHA. Again, the trainee is not receiving a wage, so we're saying that explicitly here to the employer on this document, that it is not a wage and that it's a training offset, that it can be terminated at any time if it's not a match, that it is not a requirement that a hire is the result of these experiences. Again, we lay that out, and then we do say explicitly that the employment consultant will keep in touch and follow up and see how the trainee is doing. The next section of this document lays out some of the skills and experience that we're looking to get. We have a start date and an end date right here, and then we can enter in here the days of the week and the hours per day. It's a little bit of a drop down. I try to make most of these forms electronic, so you can either do them electronically or you can just write them in manually. Progressive Employment Desk Reference, I don't even need to open that. Actually, we already looked at that. Here's the vendor request form. Whenever we're making any kind of a payment through our business office to either our candidates or to the businesses, we need to generate a vendor request form. So we have the name of the business, the person that's in the business, those address informations. We're going to get, if it's an individual, we're going to get their last 4 digits of their Social Security. Or if it's a business, we're going to get their federal employer ID number. We select what kind of payment this is, and then we put an explanation in here if there's additional information that we want to include. Let's see. So this is the Dear Employer letter. This is the letter from James that verifies that all trainees have insurance coverage. So this usually, as I mentioned, suffices as far as reassuring businesses that there is insurance that covers these individuals when they're in their workplace. So this letter is a great letter to give to the employer, and hopefully that's all you need to give them to be able to move forward with a placement. Insurance desk reference we already looked at. Again, remembering that all trainees are covered by default. You don't need to generate that insurance certificate. Here's the OJT agreement that I mentioned earlier. Again, this lays out the employer, their address, that information. We put in here the amount that we're going to be reimbursing for how many hours of training, what are the dates, and then what is the employee being trained as. We're going to have layout here how often we're going to check in with them. And then we state very clearly here that if they do satisfactorily, they'll be retained as a regular employee, remembering they're already an employee at that point. If they're not performing satisfactorily, then we will have an opportunity to provide a reasonable accommodation or other opportunity to improve their skills prior to them being terminated. We give them the name and the address of vocational rehabilitation to submit the bills to, and they should ideally be on their letterhead. I actually have a template I'll show you in a minute, and then here are the signatures to sign off to verify. And here is where you can actually put in the job title, but also give a broader description of what the training is, what kind of job duties. This is where you can actually have a little bit more of a narrative or even bullet points around what it is you're looking to have the person trained in or supported in. Here's the invoice template. Again, this is just a very simple template that we can share with an employer. They can enter the information in here and then just print it on their letterhead. Talks it again, capturing their, we're going to enter here our vocational rehabilitation address, the city and the zip, and then we're going to have the business name, their federal employer ID number, their address, phone number, etc. We're going to put all that information in here, and that's what they're going to print onto a letterhead, and it will act as their invoice to us for reimbursement. The desk reference we've already shown you. Creative hiring opportunities. This is the marketing piece that we share with employers. I just wanted to make sure it was on the site, so if you ran short, you could print these. It's a two-sided. Ideally, if you can print it on cardstock, that's great, but it lays out some of the options that we have available and lays out the liability and the coverages. So this is a great tool when we're talking to businesses that gives them a quick overview of what progressive employment is and how they can access it. So in the consumer forms and information, we have a brochure for candidates that talks about work experiences, what the expectations are, how it could benefit them. And again, it's reiterating with the individual. And as you saw in the 6-point test, we need to make sure the individual also understands that there is no promise of an employment at the end of these training opportunities, that there's a training offset and not a wage. Those are laid out here, so it's important that we give this document to all of our candidates who are participating in progressive employment. Here's the progressive employment agreement. This is the agreement that the individual consumer is going to sign off on. This verifies that they agree to the training site, the duties, the start date, the end date, how many hours per week. Here we can actually enter the hours from when to when for each of the days of the week, just so that everybody's on the same page as far as who's showing up and where they're showing up. Talks a little bit about training offsets, what they'll need to do to get those training offsets, the attendance report, treat it like a real job, fill out a self-eval if they like. Again, we're asking them if they're not going to make it to a work experience, just as they would if they were employed, they're going to call the employer and they're going to let them know. We expect the employer will give us the feedback on performance, and so we're telling that to the individual so they know that we're going to be asking those questions. And then here they're verifying they understand that this is for training and assessment. There's no requirement for a hire, and around the training offset. So they're just acknowledging this agreement. At the very bottom of this document is a request for extension. As I mentioned earlier, if you're going longer than 8 weeks, you need to get the extension approved by either the regional manager or myself. So this is where you would make that request and then enter the information back in. Here's a participant progress report. This is a form that we do not, and this is important, we do not hand this to the employer or send this to them via email and ask them to fill it out. This is feedback that we're getting from a conversation with the employer, either in person or on the phone or by email, and you can actually identify those on the top of the form. And then it's just a ratings. It's basically a scale that talks about many of the areas that we know are important to employers, and it's important for our customers to learn. So things like acceptable attendance, appropriate language, requesting assignments, appropriate dress, attitude, all of these things, many of them being soft skills that we need to get some information from the business. This feedback can be gathered weekly. It can be gathered at the end of the experience. Ideally, we're obviously talking to the business all through the experience. So it's not a bad idea to have several of these filled out during the placement, because we could see and show measurable skill gains also as we move somebody from, say, satisfactory up to very good or excellent. Individual grant request, this is the actual form that generates the payment. So the individual's name is going in here. This is where the admin staff are going to enter the authorization numbers, the check numbers, other instructions. The individual is going to sign off on it. This is going to be submitted along with that attendance verification. Okay, so then we get to worksite reporting. This is just very simply a copy of an insurance card that talks about if there is an injury at work, what to do and how to move it forward. Again, I would ask that if there's any injury on any of these experiences, you should let me know right away. And you should be helping the individual to submit this report, but I can certainly help with that as well, but you need to let me know right away. So this walks through medical treatment, disability, all kinds of other information. And the contact information is at the bottom of the page. Again, if there's any injury, any problem, or any issue, what you're going to want to do is click my name right there. It's going to give you a link to an email. You can just send an email to me and let me know what the situation is. And then forms at a glance. Again, these are all just a rehash, but there's your information and schedule for the placement. Here's the insurance confirmation letter from James, the OJT agreement, the creative hiring opportunities document. For the job seeker, here's that brochure, attendance report, progress report, the individual grant request, and the self-eval. Here's the insurance information. Here's all of the desk references in one place. At the very bottom is the work opportunity tax credit. This is a program brochure for the tax credit. It's a rather large file. I'm not going to wait to open that. It has the Form 8850 instructions to fill out the Form 8850. Explains to employers what some of the target groups are and how to apply or how to report. Here's the actual Form 8850 that needs to be completed and submitted to the Department of Labor here in Vermont. It does not get submitted federally. It gets submitted here locally to a contact. And here's the 9061 eligibility form that just verifies that the individual is eligible for the work opportunity tax credit. And that is it. So again, this is the Progressive Employment page on the CWS website. I thank you for taking the time to join me. I would encourage you to jump onto the website and take a look at these materials. If you see anything that isn't quite right, please let me know and we can quickly make a change. And again, I would love it if you go in and check out these videos, because I think they tell the story very well of what we do and how well it works for both the employers and for our customers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign out of this webinar. I appreciate you sitting in. And hopefully you can go forth and use Progressive Employment successfully out there in the field and get more and more folks work. So thanks so very much. Have a great day.